we lived behind that, and Dad had another shop in Furwick Road, which became the main centre of Canvey as time went by. When I was 4, we moved to a house, so we weren't behind the shop anymore. And shortly after that, Dad then got a shop at the seafront. And we had 4 at any one time at the most, at any one moment. And he also got one on the holiday camp. But the seafront shop was the one I first started working in. And I was about 13 or 14. And there I was sitting munching my cereal in the morning. And I overheard Mum and Dad talking. It was one of those shops like the greengrocers that had the shutters at the front. It was all open, and outside were stands of postcards and so forth. And there was a man who used to stand outside that part of the shop to take the money for people, so people didn't have to come in the shop to get the postcards. Well, Mum and Dad, I overheard them talking that they thought he was pocketing some of the take-ins, and they didn't know what to do about it. And I piped up, I was about 13, I might have been just 14, and said, well, can't I do that? And my dad thought about it, and he said, oh, all right. So he said, I'll pay you a penny for every shilling you take. I think it was every shilling, it might have been 2, but I think it was a penny for every shilling. Well, the staff always want to be nice to youngsters, don't they? So they kept putting in this leather bag I had round me, the money they took, which meant I was taking, it seemed, much more than it seemed I was. So I was ending up, my dad said, you're earning more than the staff, we're going to have to cut you down to 2 shillings an hour. You know? So, yeah, that was a change. But I enjoyed working there because mainly day trippers coming down and for the day to Canvey. We had all the amusement arcades around. That was one of the drawbacks. Whatever was on the favourite song of the time, you could hear on the jukebox next door in the arcades all day long, day after day. It might have been a song you liked, but by the time that summer finished, you'd gone off it. And there was one dramatic thing that would happen while I was there, and you have to remember, as I say, I was still very young, and the other woman I was working with, she came round the counter and I looked down, and I don't know if you remember the quash drinks, that they were bottles put upside down, and you had a shot of the juice into a cup and then some cold water. Very popular drink. And I thought she'd knocked one of them over because there was all this blackcurrant stuff. And I pointed at it and said, she said, oh, it's my varicose veins. Because immediate panic at this pool of blood. And all the people in the shop saying, well, do this, do that, do this. Well, eventually we sat her down, put a tea towel round, and I kept shouting at someone to call an ambulance, because not even was there no mobile phones, but there wasn't a phone in the shop. And someone had gone to a call box, but no ambulance come, and I don't know how long it was up. But I was in such a panic. And this shop was completely open, and I just left the shop with her under the care of other customers and biked to the nearest doctor's, which was across 2 fields. Funny enough, those fields had a path in them, and I lived in a house that was later built on one of those fields, and we had to have a right of way, but that's another story, but a right of way because it had always been a path across it. So I banged on this doctor's door, Dr. Lindner, and he came to the door. He was a rather rotund, but quite smiley, but very bald man. And he said, it's all right, my dear, you do not have to break the door down. And I told him what had happened, and he came straight away. And I biked back over the field, bumpity, bumpity, bumpity. And I mean, people probably did take some, you know, the odd bar of chocolate, but I have to say, it wasn't looted, the shop, you know, it weren't bare shelves. So, yeah, that was the most exciting thing that happened there, and quite difficult. But the shop I liked working in most was the one on the holiday camp. Now this was, I mean, Canvey was smaller than Clapton, much smaller, and the holiday camp, which was owned by a Colonel Field, a very strange, eccentric man, who, if anyone drove more than 20 miles on the camp, he'd come out with his stick waving. at them. I mean, really, you know, he'd get prosecuted today, I think. And it was a very down-market version of Butlins, very down-market. But it was the East End come out there in the summer. A lot of people stayed for the whole 6 weeks, and the dad went home at the weekend, back up to Fenchurch Street. A lot of them worked in manual work, but the family stayed down for the whole 6 weeks. And because there's always differences, everyone has to have a sort of graded, there were the tents, they were the sort of bottom of the rung. And then there were chalets, which are a little bit upmarket, probably cost 5 shillings a week. And the ablutions, I remember they were called the ablutions, were just like corrugated iron round a square with the wash basins in, totally opened above. And that was, you know, very primitive, but people seemed to enjoy it. And of course the people who got caravans were really the quite posh ones. Now, working in the holiday camp, I did do it for quite a time, but always in the summer holidays or weekends. I was at school still, and the place had been an army camp during the war, so it had been left empty. So if you can imagine army huts, not very deep the shop, but very wide in the other way. So in this shop it had the newspaper, the main bit was newspapers and cigarettes, you know, the essentials. One end was all the sweets, the other end had all the novelties, and also everything that you might forget to take with you when you went on holiday. You know, toothbrushes, soap, all those stuff. Of course, women's sanitary wear was kept under the counter in those days. You know, not like it is on the shelves today. In a brown bag it was given. And so when people come down on a Saturday, that was the first thing that they were looking for. But then each day, and particularly Sunday mornings, the shop would be open about 8 o'clock, and you could get there 8 or 9, and because people knew you worked there, and as soon as you got in the shop, you were people trying to give you money, and you got behind the counter with the newspapers and cigarettes, and all you did for about 3 hours was, it was 10 weights and the news of the world, so you grab the news of the world and the 10 weights. Someone might ask for the people, for a bit of change, someone might have senior service. I always had a problem because 10 weights, I couldn't ring up in one go. The old style tills, they had the shilling at one end, the halfpenny at the end, and the 5 in the middle, and whichever I had to do it twice because I just couldn't reach my hand across either way. And you could stand there for 3 hours until you know, the queue finally went down. And if you could get a break. But that was Sundays. Of course, then every other morning was busy, but it quieted down during the week. And then as the day went on and everyone went off to the beach or what we called the casino, which was like the amusement arcades, whatever they did, people loved it. I mean, it was such a simple holiday, really. But coming out from the East End, it was fresh air, bit of sea, fields around, the children could just play, you know, games in, and they really enjoyed it. And then the other thing that happened was a busy period. Of course, if in the week it rained, then the shop stayed busy, but people were then looking for magazines, puzzle books, perhaps kids, you know, Ludo and Lotto and all those sort of games. That was good for business if it rained one day, but if it rained for several days at a time, people started going home because it was pretty miserable if you're in the chalets or the tents even more. So my parents liked a bit of rain, but not too much. But in the evenings was our other busy time. Like all good holiday places, they had a show in the evening, but again, probably very down market to what Butlins had. And like one night was a talent show, and another night a film show, and all those sort of things. I remember one year they struck lucky because there was a woman who sang Around the World beautifully, and she was there for quite a few weeks, and every night she sang this so well, a really good talent, you know. But what did I do? I loved serving the kids and all this excitement of going over to the show. And then whatever time, 7:30, 8 o'clock it started, I was allowed to leave the shop and leave my parents and all the other staff, because we had quite a lot of staff in it, to clear up. And I was allowed to stroll over to the show, which was what I did. But then when I got to the show, what did I do? Did I stay at the show? No, I didn't. I hot-footed it, and it must have been a good 20 minutes or more, even sort of doing a trot, to where the amusement arcades, we called it the casino, to where they were. And I had an hour or so on the dodgems, and because my parents weren't very keen on me going in there, so I took that chance, rushed there, and then when it was 20 minutes before the show ended, I'd rush back again, because it was on the same thing every, the weeks, what the show was, and it was the same each week. So I could then just stroll back to the shop looking cool and, Of course, when it came to the end of the week, it was going home time. And the busy thing at going home time was buying presents for all the family. And, the postcards had all gone off, which I always, funny enough, filled the postcards, a little version. I filled the postcards. We had the scenic ones. Some of them weren't so scenic. We had one that was at the railway line. Who would never pulled that one? We had stacks of this at the Fisher Street line. I don't know how they they put it in a mixture of foam postcards, so they just came with a lot. But also we had the so-called dirty postcards. And at that age, I didn't always understand one of them. And it's funny talking about Catherine Booth. There was one that I didn't quite get, and it was a suffragette, because it was that period of time. She's standing there saying, there is little difference between men and women. And there's a voice from the audience who says, 3 cheers for the little difference. But at that age, I just didn't quite get up that. But anyway, back to the gifts. And there were certain gifts that were very popular for a year. And I remember particularly one of them. We had the Devon pottery, but this particular one, it was called an old soak, and it was a drunken man leaning on a lamppost, and at the top, the bit of paper went from blue to pink, depending on the weather, and there was a little rhyme on it. And I think they sold for 1 and 11, which was 10p. And people would come and get them and then take it back to the caravan and chalet, and someone else would see it and say, oh yeah, Bill would like that, and they come over. We just could not get enough of these. And I think we had 2 left over at the end of the season, never sold them the next season. We were stuck with a couple. It was really funny. And Butterkiss one year, do people remember Butterkiss? And that was another thing that was amazingly popular, and then the next year wasn't. You would think I would have got put off sweets, working in a sweet shop, but I never did. And my dad said when I got married, oh, I'll be glad to have a full set of roses on the counter. But other jobs, I'm doing a little diversion again here, but other jobs that I did before I worked in the shop was filling up the sweet jars with sweets, because they came in boxes, but you just refilled the sweet jar. All the old sherbet lemons and stuff, pear drops. And I had to put a label in halfway down saying what they were and how much. And I always forgot to put the label in until I'd filled it up and I'd have to unfill it again. And the other job I got was putting Smarties, loose Smarties, in little bags, cellophane bags, for an ounce for 3p or 6p, whatever. And of course one went in my mouth for every bag I filled. But anyway, yeah, so eventually the gifts, and then everyone not everyone departed, but some people stayed the whole day, but whole summer, but then we get a fresh lot of people, which for 15, 16, I was there until I stopped being at school. It was great to have a fresh set of boys every summer coming down. And then the shop, I mean, it really was a bit like Clacton. That was his heyday, the late 50s and the early 60s. And it's changed. That camp is completely different now. But it was a really enjoyable experience. Oh, and another thing that, I mean, it was very strongly the East End. And of course, again, the newspapers were so important then to what they are now, because the racing results were always the important thing. You know, people would wait for the van to come round, because my dad also served the other shops with the evening papers, and they'd wait for the van to come round so they get the racing results. But I also remember, and I don't know if anybody else remembers this, but it was during that time when I was working in the shop, that there was the case of 3 or 4 children that got shut in coal bunkers in the East End. They weren't put in them, they got climbed into them, the lids went down, and they were missing for several days. Can't remember their names, but it was a big, big thing at the time. And eventually they were found, and apart from being very sooty, they were all right. But this was a massive thing, and the police they had an amnesty with that area of the East End, because the police wanted to search the houses, and they said, we won't prosecute you if we find stolen goods, because they were so wanting to find these children. But what was amazing was that people were really concerned about the children. They were coming in the shop, any news all the time. Oh, it really sticks in my mind, that. So, yeah, it was a good time. And I think I'm almost up to my 20 minutes, aren't I? If there's any questions, I mean, it's such a change to what the shops are now in the way they're so automated. Okay, anyone want to ask him?
Your father's other shop still in Canvey Island?
Does he still?
Well, were they? You said you were at one of the holiday camp. Were the other shops on Canvey Island?
Yeah, they were all on Canvey Island. The first one up the High Street. Do you know Canvey Island? No. And the second one in the middle of town, and the other 2 were there. And then he got rid of the front shop, and then eventually the camp shop, and he did have another one down the road. But he was quite well known. Oh, and then he had Craven Avenue, which was a bigger shop. And that's, yeah, when he died, he had that one, you know. But life of a newsagent isn't easy. My grandparents were newsagents in Hackney, in Homerton High Road. So but they insisted he had a trade before he ran the shop, and he trained as a piano maker, and I think the shop prospered more than being a piano maker, but I think that trade has come back a bit, but that's how things go, isn't it? Yeah. Okay.
You mentioned the newspapers and the horse racing, but the most important thing was Saturday evening from the football results.
Football results, yeah.
And I remember man shouting, he used to shout, News Star Standard Classified.
Yes, they had things.
And I think there was something, a pink newspaper that had football results as well. And that was, you know, everybody wanted a newspaper.
Yeah.
It was about, say, 5 o'clock.
Yes, yeah. And it did have classified on it.
And you didn't know, you didn't know if Arsenal or Tottenham won at all until you got the newspaper.
Yeah.
So they were so important.
Yeah.
And then you check the pulls off of it. Apparently.
Yes, yes, they would see.
Yeah. It was,
Yeah. Okay.
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Helen, for volunteering at all to do this, to be one of our members that give the talk. Secondly, for being the first, for going first. And thirdly, for the talk itself. I always love your reminiscences about Canvey and the shops.
I'm actually going to go Friday to Canvey, just to have a little wander around and reminisce.
You can come again next year.
I don't know.
And also, I was actually talking of the newsagent in Homerton High Road. I was actually born in Homerton High Road.
Oh, were you?
Hackney Hospital.
Oh.
So there you go.
Weren't we all? Well, they wouldn't have.
You as well.
They wouldn't have. What year were you born? No, they wouldn't.
Hey, he hasn't told us what year he was born.
They wouldn't have had that shop, I don't think, at the time.
Well, I wouldn't have gone in there. Not when I was born. What? Right, thank you. Thank you very much for being first. Second is oh, there you are. Yeah. Leo. Hand you over.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me at the back?
Yeah.
Anyone can't hear me? Because of course over there. No. Right, well, I'm Leo. And today I'm going to talk about invasions of Britain, the successful ones. So, we've now got proms on, and one of the big prom songs, what we heard on the last night, is Rule Britannia. Very stirring song. And every year, James Thomas, his lyrics gets belted out with gusto. But how accurate are these lyrics? And if you break them down, you find out they're not very accurate at all. Take the first two lines. When Britain, first at Heaven's command, rose from the Azure main. Hot stuff, isn't it, eh? Brings out the old patriotism in you. But what should the true words for that be? Surely the true words for that should be, Britain, due to global warming, appeared from under the ice. Doesn't have quite the same ring to it, does it, somehow? And I can't see even a good operatic voice like Leslie Garrett really stirring any emotions in those words. And the little chorus, like the bit at the end there, where we turn around and say, Britons will never be slaved. Well, surely we need now to establish just what population we had was called Britons before we can actually make that claim. So anyway, that's about 100,000 to 60,000 years ago. The population in the UK was nil. And the reason for that was, Britain was under a sheet of ice. And even the most optimistic Neanderthal travel agent couldn't sell skiing holidays in Brighton. But yes, the first people who actually come back onto there was the ice melted and receded. So the water levels rose, but there was still a land bridge that connected the Netherlands to right here, East Anglia. Now, the Neanderthals were the first people to actually occupy Britain. And when the Neanderthals first occupied Britain, they found a land full of game. There was mammoths, there was rhinos, and there was giant beaver, to name but a few. And we never really give the Neanderthals much credit for inventions. We know they invented stone tools, and we know that they used fire to cook their food. But should we not also credit them with the invention of endangered species and mass extinction? Because when was the last time any of you see a rhino grazing in the fields around Wheelie? After the Neanderthals come us, Homo sapiens. And we've given quite a few names in the past. We was known first off as Homo sapiens, early humans, and modern human. So, or modern man, should I say. Now, we don't really know what happened to the Neanderthals, but they disappeared. Now, whether that was through environment, conflict, disease, or integrating with the new species, or all five, or all four, should I say, I tend to opt for the integration. And if anyone asks me to give an example of sort of like Neanderthals being integrated with modern man, I point out that occasionally we do see the odd occasion Neanderthal, normally around Westminster, and particular in a place called the House of Lords. Well, the first people who actually was given a name come from around Turkey, or are thought to come from Turkey, and these were the beakers. Now, the beakers were so called for their drinking vessels, and not because they had an abnormally large facial feature, which is a slur we'll use for a later invader. Now, modern man had set about clearing the forests, and were doing these massive earthworks, and showed the first signs of religious practices. They buried their dead, and they also made wooden henges. Now, when the beakers got here, they rather liked what modern man had done, but they found these wooden henges very high maintenance, because after 25 years the wood would rot and they'd need to rebuild the whole henge. And it wasn't as if they could prolong the life of the henge by going down to B&Q and buying a pot of Ronstall. But anyway, the Beakers decided that they would build their henges out of stone. And we've seen an example of Stonehenge. Now, this has had historians arguing for some time, the purpose of Stonehenge. Is it a site of religious ritual, or is it nothing more than a giant calendar to tell them when to plant their tomato seeds? And in the 20th century, another theory started to rise, and that was that these were spaceports for advanced civilizations from other galaxies. Now, I personally don't buy into this, because as pretty as it is, I cannot see why an advanced civilization would jump several hundred light years just for a fortnight in Wiltshire. And if you do find one of these theorists who comes on carrying on about, no, they are spaceports, I find the best way to get rid of them is to turn around and say, okay, mate, whereabout is the arrival lounge, and what one is the departure lounge, and which of these stones is for passport control? Now, if that doesn't shut them up, they normally walk away, muttering words like imbecile and ignoramus, and all I say is, well, sticks and stones. You know. But anyway, after the Beakers, we got the Celts. Now, the Celts were quite an aggressive fighting force, like, you know, very aggressive people. But although they was named under one banner of the Celts, they wasn't very united. And the best description I can give you is to think about 1970s football fans. They would fight amongst themselves, although they supported the same sports. Now, the Celts, despite not really always getting on with each other, nevertheless established these very lucrative trade routes. And this drew the attention of a man with an overinflated ego, a bit of a girly name, and possibly a long nose. Now, I'm talking about Julius Caesar. Now, and even today, anybody with an abnormally large facial feature we refer to as having a Roman nose. Now, Julie didn't want to sort of buy into these trade routes, he wanted to run these trade routes, so he decided to invade Britain. And it took him 3 attempts to do so, which is where we might get the phrase third time lucky. But his tactic was, to use tactics and to exploit the weakness, what the Celts had, which was they didn't really get on with each other. And he'd done this by sort of like a little bit of bribery, shall we say. He sent a few sort of his officials into the town, into a village, to chat to the village elder, and the conversation would go something like this. I say, old chap, if we gave you some money, would you mind awfully staying at home on Saturday and develop this little game we invented where you've got a rolled up cowhide and you're kicking between 2 sticks? And while you're doing that, do you mind if awkwardly if we race on down the road and give your troublesome neighbours a damn good thrashing? Now, of course, that's said in Latin. And maybe we didn't get the other part of that, where it was our societies are saying in 2,000 years' time, the Romans will now be called Italians, and we'll give you a damn good thrashing at this sport you're inventing. But anyway, nevertheless, sort of like Julius did actually sort of like manage to conquer Britain. And this was an heroic feat, and it required an heroic statement. And the statement he got from his scribes was, I came, I saw, I conquered. But nobody ever mentions the other one, which is it's cold, it's wet, and I'm out of here. Because Julie left and probably never returned. Like, being sort of like hacked to death in sort of like the Senate might have had something to do with it. But then it was left to Derek Jacobi to read, sorry, it was left to Claudius to, hang on, Julia, Claudia. I mean, the best insult the Celts have come up with, I say, mate, you've got a big nose. Oh, come on. Like, anyway, Claudius introduced Roman culture and architecture into the British Isles. And where Claudius managed to sort of conquer Britain, his successor, Nero, very nearly lost it. Only this time, the aggressor wasn't from overseas, didn't have a particularly girly name, but was nevertheless all woman, and of course I'm speaking about Boudica. Now, Boudicca was of the impression when her husband died that she would become the Queen of the Iceni. The Romans had other ideas and appointed their own governor. Now, her reward for sort of having a little moan about this was to be publicly flogged, and just to show how civilised the Romans were, they raped their daughters. Now, this sort of obviously meant that Boudicca was looking for revenge, and she had the common sympathy vote of her people. And when her army was big enough, she'd done her best impression of Alan Sugar and went to Colchester and sacked it. And just to show that the Celts could be as civilised as the Romans, they slaughtered everybody, whether they're Roman and all their collaborators. Now, emboldened by this success, she got other tribes and villages to join her. And she repeated her success in London and St Albans. This girl was on a roll, but the wheels come off her chariot at the Battle of Watling Street. Now, with Boudicca out of the way, this left the Romans to sort of deal with their other thorn in their side, which was the Druids. Now, the Druids had withdrawn themselves to Anglesey. And on the day of the battle, the Druids come up with this idea that they'd strip off naked, because they didn't want their blood on their new sheepskin jacket, and they'd paint themselves blue to intimidate the Romans. Now, why they thought that a horde of giant smurfs was going to intimidate the Romans, you'd have to ask them. And you can't, because on the final act of civilization, they slaughtered everybody on the island, whether they be a warrior, a priest, a woman or a child. But the Romans never really managed to conquer the whole of the country. There was a little lot up north called the Picts and the Scots, who would flatly refuse to engage in an all-out battle with the Romans, preferring instead to have little skirmishes. And this was left to Adrian. Anyway, this was left to Adrian to solve this problem, and his solution was he built a wall. Now, as with all empires, the Roman Empire collapsed, and the Romans vacated Britain. And this left the way for their next invaders, which were the Anglos and Saxons. Now, or the Angles and Saxons. Now, once again, they established these lucrative trade routes. They were selling sort of like produce and some very intricate artwork, and I'll suggest a trip to Sutton Home to have a look at how wonderful their jewellery was. And once again, there was another group who now wanted to go in on this, and this was come from the east of these islands, and they were the Norwegians and the Danes, who grouped together and called themselves the Vikings. Now, the Vikings gained control of little bits of Britain, but never ever managed to gain control over the whole of Britain. And this is leading us to the very last people who successfully invaded these islands. And I'm talking about 1066 and Hastings and all that. Now, this was a war between ambition and betrayal. The ambition was a French guy called William, who was of the impression that on the death of Edward the Confessor, he would become the King of England. The betrayal was Harold, who, to buy his freedom, pledged that he would support William's claim to the throne. However, when old Eddie took his last breath, Harold picked up the throne, stuck it on his head and said, "I'm the King of England, I'm going to get rid of these Vikings once and for all." Now this infuriated William, and William turned around and said, "If I can't get the throne by succession, I'm going to take it by force." So promptly went round all of northern France looking for anybody named Norman to form an army. Now, while Harold was up north, chucking the Vikings out, William decided this was a good time to invade Britain, so he landed at Hastings. And he thought just a nice little mosey up the A21 to London and he could become king. However, he found that Harold was waiting for him in a defensive area with the rest of his Saxons in a little place called, conveniently, Battle. Now, William knew that he was going to have to face Harold one time. So he decided, here's as good a place as ever. So he started to attack their defensive positions. But it wasn't going very well for him. So hastily dragging out his Roman guide to conquering Britain, turning to this chapter on tactics, he came up with this wonderful idea. He'd get his Normans to charge up to the Saxons, cheering and shouting, have a quick skirmish, and turn around and run away screaming. Believing that the will to fight had left the Normans, the Saxons left their defensive positions and charged after them with the intentions of putting them back into the English Channel. Unfortunately, they ran into an ambush, and this left Harold and the royal household completely exposed to William and his Norman archers. And this was one in the eye for the Saxons, and in particular for Harold. With their king dead and royal family wiped out, the Saxons threw in the towel, and William went up to London and became the King of England. But it didn't quite end there, because what doesn't get normally mentioned is for the first few years of William's reign, it was very oppressive, and he was chucking the Saxon barons and the lords off their lands. And when he done this, there was this occasional little skirmish, which was easily put down, but nevertheless was costing money out of his exchequer. So he decided that he would use the tactic of appeasement. He would agree to the Saxons to keep hold of their manors, to work their land, in return for a little levy, what would go into the sort of like the British economy, to make sure that we provided an army to protect everybody in Britain. And that it really just sort of like, to sort of make sure that he collected his levy, he set in an administrator. And that really is the end of my little talk about invasions of Britain. And really all that just leaves me to do is to repeat what the Saxon baron said to his new assessor. Over to you, Norman. Thank you.
Yeah, right, thank you Leo for that quick run through history, entirely accurate in every detail.
Absolutely, I think the chronological order was anyway.
But the chronological order was right, yeah.
Was that you writing my contract for next few seasons?
Yeah,
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Yes, oh, so it's that time.
yeah.
Oh, right, okay, lovely.
You'll star in the summer show next year.
That's it, I've got the summer show next year. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Leo. Right, well, next we've got Helen. Are you all ready?
Well, I'll get it.
This is technology at its best here. So far we haven't had any pictures, but we've sort of got some pictures now, I hope. All right, Alan?
Yeah.
Over to you, hopefully.
Oh, thank you. Well, I thought we were just going to have a tea break and I was going to get it ready, but so is it going to work out? Because I'm going to talk for about 3 hours.
Yeah, right.
So, what's the time? Do you want me to? My talk's going to last half hour or so. Do you want me to start it now and then have tea?
Get on with it, Alan.
Get on with it. Right, so I don't know if anybody knows where that is.
Yeah.
So I live in Walton on the Naze. I lived there about 15 years, and I've decided to get involved in the history. So my 2-year project has been a history of all the shops, which has been quite difficult. And then I moved on to the Kino. And I don't know if you know the Kino in Walton? And I'm going to talk about that. Where's that picture gone?
Something kept went over it. If you put across that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here we are. Right, let's see if this works. So that's the Kino in Walton. It's in the main, just at the end of the shopping area. Right, so let's get my book. So I can't remember all things. So people that live in Walton call it a Kino or the Kino, whatever you like. And the name of that is German for cinema. So originally it was a cinema, and it was first built in 1914 by a Mr. Kelly. And he ran it as a silent movie cinema. And that's when he bought in 1914 and it opened in 1916. So the next picture. So most of my information came from newspapers, because nobody's ever written a book about it or anything. So I was the museum let me look through all the newspapers. So this is the first advert I saw for it says operator experienced, a Gaumont machine, fullest particulars, references to Mr. Fears at the Kino. And this was in the days of silent movies. And I'll just go back a bit. When the cinema was built, it was always an independent cinema. It had one screen and 400 seats in that building. And the history of it is, it was a cinema for many years, and it was. I'll go into the history of it, what I managed to find out. So this is the 1918. It was run by a man called Cyril Gilbert and his wife called Lulu. They took over the cinema. So when I started the research, I found out that this lady called Lulu was world famous. And I have to read my notes now. She was world famous. She was born in Singapore, and her parents were called George and Ella Loyal. And I found out that they travelled around the world performing in circuses, and went to New York, Cuba, and probably that's why Lulu was said to be born in Singapore. Anyway, the parents travelled around the world in USA, Caribbean, and their act was that the husband, her father, used to be put in a cannon, as big round, I don't know if you've seen pictures of these big round wooden ones, and they would fire the cannon, and his wife was on a trapeze, and she would catch him mid-air, and that was their entertainment. But in those days, that was a big thing. Circus people, they went all around the world, and they went to America, and Lulu went with them. And her mother was world famous. And there's a newspaper story that she was given diamonds by somebody you've heard of called Blondie, who was a famous wire walker and typewriter walker. And they went all over the world. Anyway, when Lulu was older, she married a man called George Mears in Brixton. And they performed as Lulu Mears and her husband. And her trademark was she dressed up as a Spanish toreador costume. Her husband came from a family of performing gymnasts, and him and his brothers did a comedy wire walking act. Anyway, Lulu then came back to London and she lived in Kensington, and this is where she met Cyril Gilbert. And they lived together. I found them in censuses. Cyril, he was a famous theatre manager. He used to book up acts in London or all the theatres. So both of them were involved in the entertainment world and things. And I think when they probably got too old and Lulu couldn't perform that, they came to Walton and they took over the movie cinema. And that's so Lulu lived from 1875 to 1929. And I found out that when she died, she died in Walton. I don't know if you know, there's a road called Mill Lane, and she lived in a house there. And her obituary was in a local paper. What I found surprising, perhaps you might know this, in 1929, she wasn't buried, she was cremated, and she was taken to Ipswich. So does this mean that in 1929 there were no facilities in this area for people to be cremated? I've never really investigated. Anyway, so I managed to find out about her. So most of this is I'm going to show you pictures of adverts for the cinema. So this is an advert in 1921, when it was still silent movies, of the Kino cinema. And then advert says, I think you can, hope you can see it, this is the type of films that was on. None of the ones I'll show you in a minute are well-known people, and I hope that some of you might even remember the names. So this is the cinema 1921, and another film, The Lone Star Ranger, The Son of Tarzan, and these are the things. And I think some of the adverts tell you, this is in 1921 in Walton, so we had the Kino cinema, and also we had another big building called the King's Theatre. The King's Theatre is in the High Street where the town hall was, and it's been demolished. And cinema had a continuous performance, and you can see the prices. So it's 5p, 9p a shilling to get in. The actor at the King's Theatre was called the Piro Pie. And I don't know if you've seen pictures of entertainments here at Clacton and Walton. The Piros were entertainers who dressed up and painted their faces white and had a strange hat on, and they were called Piro. This is I find it's difficult to blow up the picture to read it, so that's the story about in the newspaper. I've written down what it says. It says in 1921, as Kino, there was a lecture. They was using it for all facilities. And that newspaper story says that the lecture was done by the National Council for Combating Venereal Disease. I thought, talk 1921. And it was a film showing the awful effects of how the disease was called. And they blamed it on the due to the modesty and ignorance of young women and men. And this was one of the uses of the cinema. And this was published in the local newspaper in 1921. This is another film in 1921 called The Fifth Commandment. And it's a Pathé one. So we're still talking about silent movies.
And then there's always a cereal.
Yeah. So during this time, I'm sorry you can't read that. Anyway, they used to advertise for people to come and do things at the cinema. And I don't know if you know how silent cinemas went, that somebody would be there entertaining, playing the piano for all the music, because there was no sound. It's hard to imagine. And I did talk to somebody in Walton, and she said her mother at this time used to earn some money by going down to the cinema and playing the piano. And no doubt that in Clacton, lots of people earn money by doing that. So here so we're now going to see some films. This is 1929, and this is somebody, I'm sure, have you heard of Greta Garbo?
Mm-hmm.
So she was a famous film star. And they actually said that the actual copy of this film has been lost. So the next one, it was in spring in 1930, about 9 or 10 years after, that the talking picture started. And it's trying to imagine that one day you was watching it and it was no talking, and it was just some lady playing the piano or somebody playing it. So we then came into the world of talking pictures. And these are some of the films. So this was a famous series of films called Dr. Fu Manchu. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you look down the bottom, prices, 6p, including tax, was 6p, 10p, 1 and 2, 1 and 6, and right at the back, I should imagine, was 1 and 8. Because I think if you remember cinemas, the further the back you were, the more expensive it was. Yeah.
I remember paying 6p for the children's cinema.
Yeah. Yeah, 16. So this is another film in 1931, and have you heard of Ronald Colman?
Yes.
He was a quite famous film star, and and this is the way they advertise it. It says, "A dashing, debonair renegade, redeemed by a great love, an elegant drama of love." And this was and I imagine it's with somebody called Anna Harding. I've never heard of her. Anyway, so that's the famous one. Another one here in 1931 was called Smiling Irish Eyes, but I know a few, and I'm sure you all know a few film stars' names, but I don't know those ones.
I remember that song.
So here,
Yes.
this was a film called Dynamite. Yeah, no,
I like that.
here's another famous one.
Can you go back to that one a minute?
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. A romance woman with a Rolls Royce artist, a tram car income. You have a lot of
Yes.
young things like that, don't you?
So this is the adverts for the cinemas were all publicised in a local paper.
Yeah.
There was no phones or mobiles to find out what's going on.
I like that.
So that's the way they did it. So this is another famous one called Raymond Navarro. Are we giving our age away if we remember these names? And the prices are roughly the same name. And here we have again, in 1931, Greta Garbo in a film called Anna Christie. Yeah, this film was marketed with, it's the first talkie that Greta Garbo appeared in, and the people that produced the films, talkies had been introduced, but they were very frightened to put her in talkies early because they thought it was a 5-minute wonder, and they wanted to protect her career. But eventually, in 1931, she agreed to appear in her first talking film. So this is an advert for in this period of time, 1931, a man who went to see the cinema wrote a letter to the local newspapers, and he said, "I came to the cinema and I had the pleasure of visiting your little town after 2 years absent, and I saw many changes. The Kino, my favourite picture hall in the silent days, had been transformed. The interior is beautiful and refined, and the programme, as in the silent days, was delightful. Talking, magnificent, and even distinct, and no background noise." So that's a letter that somebody actually wrote, and I found that in the paper. So we move into the more film. So this is another film, 1931, and if you remember now, I started off in 1920. So this is a film called Mamba, and different types and names of films. Another name here, George Bancroft. He was a famous film star. And here one that I'm sure you all remember is somebody called Maurice Chevalier. Now he was a French film star, and do you remember that he had a hat, this kind of flat hat, and he had a walking stick. And can anybody remember, I think I found out what his film was.
That one where they did the song. I remember it well.
Yeah, one of his most famous films, I remember this, was called Thank Heaven for Little Girls. seen that one. And he's probably one of the biggest French film stars. But I noticed here that his name's up there, and look down the bottom. It's Gary Cooper. Yeah. So in 1934, a second cinema opened in Walton, and this was the Regal. This was a big cinema, and I'm not sure if anybody remembers going to the Regal. And people often ask me where the Regal was. So if you go into Walton today, just as you get into the high street on the right is a Tesco's Express store. And that's where the Regal was. And after the Regal, it became Woolworths. And that's another part of the place. And then it eventually became Tesco Express. So the Regal opened in 1934, and it was quite a bit of competition because it was a large cinema, unlike the one there. So there's another film here, and Barbara Stanwyck, Dick Powell, and William Powell. Whether that was his brother, I don't know. And here we're talking 1938, and the name that strikes me there is George Formby. He's a famous in the time. I think George Formby. So does anybody remember what his favourite song and story was? And the one he sung?
When you're cleaning windows.
Yeah, and Leaning on the Lamppost.
Oh, Leaning on the Lamppost.
Yeah, he was very famous for that.
A record of one Mad Mulcahy.
Yeah. And another name there on the right is Mickey Rooney. That's another famous film star. Now Mickey Rooney, he appeared in all sorts of... He was in gangster films. Also, he was a good dancer. And he used to tap dance. So, by going through this, you can see the names of all the people. And another name that strikes me is Rex Harrison. Now, he was in lots of films. And was he one in My Fair Lady? Yeah. So, eventually, the cinema closed down. They had so much competition from the Regal, and these are some pictures that I've managed to get of the actual outside of the cinema. I've got what year it is. No, there's no date. But when the cinema closed, it became a big restaurant. And I don't know if anybody who knows anything about Walton, run by a family called Hipkins.
Oh,
They're quite...
tea room.
Huh?
The ones that got the tea room.
Yeah, the tea room, yes.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So they took this over, and they turned it into the cinema closed, and it became a restaurant. Now, the restaurant used to seat hundreds of people, and if you look here, this is the inside. So the cinema's gone, and this is the restaurant. And what I found out was in the 1940s and 50s, what it was used for was that people from London used to come down by coach for a day trip, and included in a coach payment was a lunch in this restaurant. So you all sat down at 12 o'clock and had this big lunch, and this is what it was used for. And here's, once they've all finished, you see they've all just abandoned all their food and rushed down to the beach, and it was left to the staff to clear up. And that's the story. I managed to get these photos, but they hadn't been dated, but I think it's 1950s. And here's some pictures of outside of the Kino. And there's the seafront. And so it went from a cinema to a big restaurant. And here's more pictures of the outside of the restaurant. What happens after cinema shut down? They become bingo halls. And this is what happened to it. And this is roughly, it's an entertainment place today. So this is a picture I found, no date, I'm sorry. And this is a man sitting outside who used to work there. Somebody told me local that after 2 years he left it and went to Australia. And here's a picture what the cinema became. This is 1967, and it's called Kino Cash Bingo. And I don't know if you all remember, wherever you lived in the country, the Regal, the Granadas, and all that became bingo halls. And I think there's probably places today that in London that are still.
The bottom of ours is
Yeah.
still a bingo, isn't it?
Yeah. So instead of using your app to play bingo, they used to go and sit there with a card and mark it off.
They still
Try and
do
imagine doing that today. Yeah.
Don't they?
But it was a community
And-
activity.
Eventually, it became an amusement place, the Kino Amusement Arcade, and that was roughly in 1985. And this is a more modern picture. And if you look on the left, where that blue car is, I hope you know something about. Today is where all the motorbikes park. There's a cafe called Revved Up,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's where they're. And there, gives you some idea where the Kino is.
You can see that.
Between the Kino and that car is some toilets, and you carry on first down to there. And this is the corner. This is all gone now, and just in front of that is the big pub called the Albion, and that's what it looked in. I'm not sure. And this is the pictures of Kino Amusements, and that still today is an amusement arcade. It's quite an interesting thing now that children are allowed in there, but a few months ago, it was in the local paper, that they banned children under 18 going into the amusement place on their own now because they had so much damage caused. So this is...
It's gambling, isn't
Eh?
it? Well, it depends on the machines that
Yeah, well,
it comes under gambling.
If you go into one, the gambling part is at the back and it's cordoned off. So if you go into, and it's the same with the piers, there's a special section for people over 18 to gamble for money, and that's the same today. So if you go to there today, that's what you'll see. So that's the history of this particular building, and it started off as a silent movie place, then went to movies, and then it became a large restaurant, I think bingo, and then today is for amusement. And that's the history of the Kino. How much time we got? Because I can do another 15-minute talk.
Thank you, Alan, for the history of the Kino, bringing back memories of film stars.
Yeah.
The film that he sang, Thank Heavens for Little Girls, in Gigi.
Gigi, yeah, that's the film. Yeah.
And Rex Harrison won an Oscar for My Fair Lady.
Did it? Yeah.
Thank you, Alan, for
And it's
that. run
interesting that they were rolling programmes, weren't they?
Yeah,
Someone else reminded me of that, you go in and... Because I had to go
This is
in...
where I came in.
I had to go in at the end of one film, the main film, see the smaller film, and then see the beginning of the main film, because my dad wouldn't let me get home late from Southend. I'd like to be able to watch films in these.
Anyway, just finally, I've lived in Walton for a long time. Unfortunately, we don't have a museum there, so I'm unable to show that. I don't know realise how lucky you are to have a museum in Clacton. It's wonderful when you go there. But the only thing I can do is I use dreaded Facebook. And if anybody uses Facebook, there's a section in Facebook called Groups. There's a group for Clacton Historical Society in there. And it's been going for many years, and there's pictures every day that you and George put on. But I've been doing it for 2 years, and there's several groups for Walton on the Naze. But there's one particular one called Walton on the Naze History Group, which I run. And if you're ever interested in seeing any history of Walton for the last 100 years, there's hundreds and hundreds of pictures and stories. So you have to go in, but you have to go into Facebook
The
to do
buses
that.
used to go down by the corner where the motorbikes are, round the back behind the toilets and come up by the side of the Kino.
Yeah, because it's little cool Kino road there. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got over 21,000 members on our
Yeah,
Facebook
21.
page, Thank you very much. Time for a tea, coffee or whatever, and I've got quite a few things to bring people up to date on afterwards, so 10-15 minutes usual, and see you later.
I'll do the round down. And that, yeah. I haven't met them with you, yeah. Oh, yeah. Everybody went there. Kids club. Yeah. Yeah. There's nothing there.
This way? Yeah? Mind that.
Help look after him at the end.
I went on Microsoft PowerPoint, yeah, that's how I managed to get pictures. But then to make a 2 minute set out, and here that's an idea for life. So I've like given a couple of what they got television screens. Yeah, each basically an art. You don't have to just cut it on the screen. But the screen we like things out. Yeah, so the only way to do yeah, it's called Walton on the Names History. Oh, right. Yeah, I've got all the families. I've got newspapers 1980 go back to 1880. I've got about 1,000 newspaper stories in there. All the families, everything that's ever done. I'm just doing one about the 1940s, about the war. I put one on the go. Have a look. Find the history of she doesn't want to do it. She's still using flip charts. Probably don't know. Round on. That's up near the front, and it was all gone. And there used to be an actual Martello tower. Yeah. Well, roughly. Do you know where Lily's place is? You walk up there, and walk down the road, and there's a green area. And that's where I was at it. So it's actually called the Round Garden. That's about it was a community centre. But when I talk to people, because we've still got the Martello parallel that town there, but there was one that's bigger than on that side. Yeah. That was an 1810. So I've done it. So I've got Road was Walton Road, yeah. I lived quite further off. Yeah. So have you been to I tell you what, shop for a year now, they do pictures. Have a look at their website. They sell plates, t-shirts with spend some money. So I've got the history of every shop.
I keep going back and
As I said, I asked the council, I said, yeah, you can have one, you've got to pay rent. So here, you know, the library. Yeah. And when I talk to people, I say, have you been to I always tell you, it's free and you can travel once a week. Well, yeah. That's all. Yeah, they don't. People think about it after, don't they? It's fun. No, I've been meetings about it. What is it offer? It's terrible. Yeah. The nice people think it's quite a shop, big shop. Yeah, and the council now. Yeah, what it is now. I don't know if you remember Walton, lifeboat. Well, we did have a museum, and the council took over it. Your peppercorn rate rent for 300 It's getting into that's what the council did.